Our story begins with an injured German soldier lying unconscious on the ground. 4 soldiers stand around him. None of them are doctors or surgeons, and some are actually the enemies he came here to fight. As snow covers the cabin from every direction, they decide to do something horrifying to save his life. They will amputate his entire arm with an axe. But that's not the strangest part. The helping with the operation isn't a fellow German soldier, a British soldier, his enemy, the very who was supposed to kill him. As the snow buries the cabin from every side, they decide to do something terrifying to save his life. They choose to chop off his entire arm with an axe. But the strangest part isn't the amputation itself, that the person helping him isn't a German comrade but a British soldier, his sworn enemy. You haven't seen anything yet, because what comes next is even more shocking. Go back to the beginning of the story to find out what happened all these events. The story takes us back to the year 1940. In the middle of World War II, the major powers were fighting over natural resources to secure an advantage in the war. Amid this brutal conflict, an incident completely changes the lives of a group of soldiers, forcing them into a battle unlike any other, not only against the enemy, but also against freezing temperatures, hunger, and death. The environment they find themselves in is merciless, with temperatures dropping below -50 degrees. The film begins in April 1940, when World War II is raging. Britain and Germany are fighting in Norway because each side wants control of the country's iron ore mines and other valuable natural resources to fuel their weapons production. During these events, a German aircraft engages in an aerial battle with a British plane. In the end, the German aircraft crashes into the snow-covered mountains. One of the 4 soldiers aboard is killed instantly, while 3 survive: Lieutenant Strunk, Stern, and Joseph. After the crash, Joseph discovers that his arm has been badly injured. Stern gives him first aid while the lieutenant searches for a safe route through the mountains. Suddenly, he falls into a deep pit. After a tremendous effort, Stern and Joseph manage to pull him out and save him. The 3 soldiers decide to head toward the coast in hopes of finding their own forces and rejoining the war. They gather the remaining supplies, strap on snowshoes that help them walk across the deep snow, and bid farewell to their fallen comrade with a military salute. Leaving, the lieutenant burns the wreckage of the aircraft so it cannot be of any use to the enemy. They continue their journey, but the severe weather makes navigation nearly impossible. Powerful snowstorms reduce visibility to almost nothing. When night falls, they dig a small shelter into the snow and spend the night inside. The following morning, the weather improves and they continue marching. Stern carries the remaining food and water supplies behind the others. Suddenly, he slips off the edge of a cliff and is left hanging in midair. Because the supply bag is tied to his belt, he can't climb back up on his own. The lieutenant orders him to cut the rope and let the supplies fall. After a difficult struggle, they finally pull Stern back up, but all of their food and water plunge into the deep valley below. Now they must continue their journey without any supplies. If they don't find help soon, starvation or freezing to death becomes a very real possibility. Everything, Lieutenant Strunk refuses to give up. He insists on pressing forward with his companions. After walking some distance, they spot a small cabin in the middle of the wilderness. Overjoyed, they rush toward it and discover that it is empty, though it contains a small amount of food and a stove they can use for warmth. Stern starts a fire. Suddenly, they hear voices outside. When they look, they see 2 British soldiers calling for help, unaware that the men inside the cabin are Germans. As the British soldiers approach, the Germans draw their weapons and demand to know who they are. One of them introduces himself as Charles, explaining that he is a British pilot. His companion is Smith, the aircraft's gunner. Their plane was shut down by German fire, and they have become lost while searching for help. Lieutenant Strunk invites them into the cabin and tells them they may stay temporarily. However, he makes it clear that they are now prisoners of war. As soon as conditions improve, they will be transferred to a German camp, where they will receive all the rights granted to prisoners, including food, water, and a place to sleep. While searching them, the Germans find a lighter in Charles's pocket. Strunk takes it and promises to return it once they leave the cabin. Charles explains that the lighter was a gift from his father and means a great deal to him. To maintain order, Strunk draws a line across the middle of the cabin floor. One side represents Germany, the other Britain. Anyone wishing to cross the line must first ask permission. Anyone breaking the rules risks being shot. Because firewood is running out, they begin burning old furniture and anything else they can find to keep warm. Stern even tears apart the wooden outhouse outside the cabin and brings back the timber to feed the fire. Meanwhile, Joseph's condition grows worse with each passing day. His wound becomes badly infected, and without treatment, death seems inevitable. Meanwhile, Joseph's condition continues to deteriorate day by day. His wound becomes badly infected, and if left untreated, it will almost certainly kill him. Charles tries to help by stepping across the line, but the Germans immediately stop him and remind him of the rules. When time to eat, Charles refuses to dine separately and asks to be treated the same as everyone else. Strunk agrees and places the table directly over the line so that they can all share the meal together. During dinner, Smith and Joseph get into an argument, but Lieutenant Strunk quickly calms the situation because he doesn't want any fighting inside the cabin. To ease the tension, they begin talking about their lives and what they hope to do once they survive this nightmare called war. Strunk explains that Stern comes from a wealthy family that owns a large company employing thousands of people. That comfortable life, Stern chose to join the army to defend his country. Smith then shares that he is a champion darts player who has won several tournaments and that he has a girlfriend named Sheila. As time passes, the atmosphere gradually becomes more peaceful, the fact that they are enemies. By evening, however, Joseph's condition worsens and they still have no medicine. Charles suggests using the alcohol inside the compass to disinfect Joseph's wound. Strunk agrees and dismantles the compass to retrieve the alcohol. Only afterward does he realize he has sacrificed their only reliable navigation tool. Thinking quickly, Strunk rubs the compass needle against Charles's silk scarf to magnetize it, creating a crude but functional compass to help them find their direction. The next morning, a violent snowstorm strikes. Strunk insists they must leave because both the food and firewood are almost gone. Charles argues that Joseph is too weak to survive the journey, but they have no better option. In the end, all 5 men leave the cabin and begin searching for a military camp or any safe place. As soon as they step outside, they are met with fierce winds and thick fog that make even walking extremely difficult. After some time, Joseph falls farther behind with Stern, while Strunk continues ahead with Charles and Smith. When Strunk finally looks back, he realizes the other 2 have disappeared into the blizzard. He calls out repeatedly, but the powerful wind carries away his voice. With no other choice, Strunk returns to the cabin, hoping to find them there. He discovers that Stern and Joseph have already made their way back. The group gathers inside, desperately trying to find a solution that will keep them alive. Charles warns them that they will all die from hunger and freezing if they remain trapped in the cabin. But Strunk refuses to give up hope. He decides they will burn the cabin itself, tearing up the floorboards and walls for firewood to keep the stove burning. He goes outside searching for anything edible and eventually finds a few frozen plants buried beneath the snow. They gather them and make a thin soup to quiet their hunger. During this time, the conflict between Smith and Joseph flares up again. To lighten the mood, Strunk organizes a shooting contest. Smith demonstrates his incredible aim by firing bullets through Joseph's coat without hitting him, then shoots a small object near his face as a harmless prank. Everyone bursts into laughter. Later, Smith walks outside toward the old outhouse and spots a herd of reindeer grazing nearby. He realizes that hunting one could provide enough food for everyone, but he can alert the others. The animals disappear into the wilderness. Returning to the cabin, Smith uses Joseph's notebook as toilet paper because they have run out of supplies. When Joseph discovers what happened, he becomes furious. He grabs his pistol and tries to attack Smith. Strunk and Stern immediately step in and persuade Joseph to lower his weapon. Joseph eventually throws the pistol away in frustration. Smith seizes the opportunity, grabs the gun, and points it directly at Joseph. In an instant, the balance of power shifts. The British soldiers now control all the weapons. Charles orders the Germans to move to the opposite side of the cabin, explaining that they are now the prisoners. Strunk argues that Joseph's condition is too serious for them to be moved, but Charles refuses. During the tense conversation, Smith asks Strunk why Germany wants to conquer the world. Strunk calmly replies that he is only a soldier following orders and that he takes no pleasure in killing. He adds that Britain also has a long history of conquering countries and exploiting their resources, and that the conflict in Norway is driven by the interests of both sides rather than ideals. Another day passes with no food left. Smith goes out hunting, and Stern accompanies him. Meanwhile, Strunk begins tearing up more of the cabin floor to keep the fire burning. Charles suggests removing the large wooden support beam in the center of the cabin. Strunk warns him that the beam is holding up the entire roof. his objections. They remove it, and the roof immediately begins to collapse on top of them. The two men struggle desperately to hold it up with their own hands while the others rush to help. Strunk warns Charles that the central wooden beam is supporting the entire roof. His warning, they remove it, and the roof immediately begins to collapse. The two men desperately hold it up with their hands to prevent the cabin from caving in completely. During the chaos, Strunk takes advantage of the distraction and recovers Charles's weapon, putting the Germans back in control. Shortly afterward, Stern and Smith return with a wild rabbit they manage to hunt. As soon as they arrive, they help secure the support beam and save the cabin from collapsing. Smith and Strunk once again point their guns at each other, but Strunk calmly explains that their survival depends on cooperation, not conflict. Eventually, they all agree to place every weapon in a box outside the cabin so that no more fights will break out. Everyone works together to prepare the meal, and the atmosphere becomes much friendlier as trust slowly develops between them. However, Joseph's condition continues to worsen. The infection keeps spreading through his arm. Charles proposes a brutal but necessary solution. Joseph's arm must be amputated. The infection spreads throughout his body. Otherwise, he will certainly die. Strunk reluctantly agrees because they have no other medical options. While tearing up more of the cabin floor, Stern discovers a hidden box containing bottles of alcohol and preserved dry supplies that had been stored there years earlier. Everyone is overjoyed, having finally found something that might help them survive. They wake Joseph and deceive him by telling him that Germany has won the war. Delighted by the news, Joseph celebrates by drinking a large amount of alcohol until he loses consciousness. Only then do we realize why they did it. They needed him unconscious so they could amputate his infected arm. The operation begins, and everyone plays a part in trying to save Joseph's life. Halfway through the procedure, Joseph briefly regains consciousness, but Smith knocks him unconscious again with a powerful blow. Strunk then completes the amputation, removing the infected arm. Because Joseph is unconscious, he feels none of the pain. Afterward, they dispose of the severed arm. Exhausted, they sit together, share drinks, and talk. Over time, the hatred between them slowly transforms into genuine friendship. Elsewhere, a group of Norwegian soldiers investigates the site where the German aircraft crashed. During their search, they discover the supply crate that had fallen into the valley earlier. This confirms that the German survivors are still alive somewhere nearby. Back at the cabin, the bond between everyone grows even stronger. They laugh together, tell stories, and celebrate simply being alive. Charles brings out the cigarettes he had been saving for a special occasion and shares them with everyone. Strunk even burns Joseph's notebook, which bears a picture of their leader, symbolizing how much their priorities have changed. The following morning, Joseph wakes up and is horrified to discover that his arm is gone. Strunk gently explains that the operation saved his life and that without it, the infection would have turned into gangrene and killed him. Meanwhile, the Norwegian soldiers continue searching for the Germans. As the storm finally clears and the sky becomes bright again, Strunk tells the British soldiers that they can now continue their journey. However, Joseph's injury will slow everyone down. Smith suggests a better plan. He and Stern will climb a nearby mountain to look for the correct route while the others remain behind and build a sled to transport Joseph. While preparing the sled, Strunk admits that his wife left him years ago and that joining the army had been part of his attempt to prove himself. Only now does he realize that everything he fought for has already been lost. Smith and Stern reach the mountaintop and finally spot a clear path leading toward a nearby military camp. Smith advises Stern that if the area turns out to be under British control, he should escape to the south. As they descend, tragedy strikes. A Norwegian sniper opens fire and kills Stern instantly. Smith is captured alive because he is recognized as a British soldier. The Norwegian soldiers then move toward the cabin and arrest the remaining men. Strunk surrenders without resistance, but he is devastated when he sees Stern's lifeless body. Leaving, Smith takes Stern's military identification tag, hoping to deliver it to his family someday. Everyone is taken to a military base for questioning. A Norwegian officer becomes suspicious of the friendship that developed between the British and German soldiers. He warns Charles and Smith that if there is any evidence they cooperated with the enemy, they could face serious consequences. Charles explains that there was never any agreement with the Germans. They simply did whatever was necessary to survive. Strunk then walks into the room, quietly places Charles's lighter, the one he had taken at the beginning, on the table, and leaves without saying a word. Strunk and Joseph are transferred as prisoners of war, while Charles and Smith are released after filing their reports with the British command. Parting ways, the former enemies exchange a final glance and a faint smile, reflecting everything they endured together and the friendship they formed during the war. In the end, we learn that Strunk and Joseph were sentenced to 7 years as prisoners of war and transferred to. Charles and Smith returned to active service, but their aircraft later crashed in another mission, and sadly, Smith lost his life. Many years later, in 1977, Strunk receives a phone call from Charles inviting him to visit London. Strunk accepts the invitation, and decades after the war ended, the two former enemies reunite as true friends. The film is based on a true story, without fictional drama or fabricated events. Its central message is that genuine friendship can overcome war, borders, and hatred, and that humanity is stronger than the conflicts that divide people. If you like this recap, subscribe and like video for get more recaps. Thank you.